She stepped into the airport with a quiet confidence that came from years of working hard and building her business from nothing. The polished floors reflected the bright lights above as she made her way through the bustling crowd, moving with purpose. People hurried past, rolling luggage and checking their phones, but she walked steadily, her head held high. She had done this many times before, traveled all over the world, but today felt different. Today she was dressed in her best suit, her hair neatly styled, her makeup subtle yet elegant, and she carried herself like someone who had earned her place anywhere. Her flight had been booked weeks ago, and she had secured a first-class ticket, the highest level of comfort on the plane. She had imagined herself settling into the wide leather seat, sipping champagne, reviewing some documents, and preparing for an important meeting. She imagined the quiet hum of the cabin, the soft lighting, and the feeling that she was in a space that belonged to her as much as it belonged to anyone else. But nothing in her imagination had prepared her for what would happen next. When she reached the front of the line and showed her boarding pass, the attendant smiled politely, but then hesitated. She followed his gaze to the seating chart and noticed his expression change ever so slightly. He cleared his throat and said, "Ma'am, there seems to be a small issue with your seat in the VIP section." Her brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I purchased first class. I confirmed the ticket yesterday." Her voice was calm but firm, the kind that came from experience, not irritation. The attendant shuffled a few papers and replied, "Yes, ma'am, but the VIP section is reserved for members only. We can't allow access today." A flash of disbelief ran through her. She had heard of such policies before, but she never imagined she would encounter one. She glanced around at the other passengers in the VIP area. Some were chatting, sipping drinks, enjoying their seats. None of them looked particularly different from her. Some had business suits, some had casual wear, but all of them seemed to be treated with ease, except her. She took a deep breath and said, "I understand the policy, but I am a paying customer for this seat. I expect to be treated fairly." The attendant maintained a polite but firm demeanor. "I apologize, ma'am, but rules are rules. We can't make exceptions today." She felt a knot of frustration tighten in her chest. She had faced challenges before, broken through barriers, and earned every achievement she had. But this felt personal in a way that stung. She wasn't just a customer. She was a human being who deserved respect. The subtle judgment, the assumption that she didn't belong here, cut deeper than she wanted to admit. As she stood there, a few passengers nearby glanced at the scene. Some offered sympathetic smiles while others avoided eye contact altogether. She noticed the whispers, the stares, and the small movements of discomfort around her. It was as if her presence had disrupted the expected order of things, and she had to fight just to claim her rightful place. Her hands remained steady at her sides, but her mind raced. She thought about her journey, how she had started with almost nothing, working long hours, building connections, taking risks that others called foolish. She remembered the nights she spent in tiny offices, the weekends she worked while others played, the setbacks she endured, and the moments when people doubted her ability because of her background, her gender, or the color of her skin. And now, even at the peak of success, she was confronted with a barrier that seemed small but symbolized so much more. "Please, I need to speak to a manager," she said finally, her voice calm but resolute. The attendant nodded and walked away to fetch someone who could address the situation. She waited, standing with her posture straight, refusing to show anger outwardly, even though her mind was spinning with frustration. When the manager arrived, he gave her a polite greeting and listened to her explanation. He too cited the membership rules and repeated that no exceptions could be made. She explained again that she had paid for the seat, that her experience mattered, and that denying her access felt unfair. The manager nodded, repeating the same lines, and she realized that reasoning with him would achieve nothing. A wave of realization hit her. This was not just about a seat on a plane. This was about respect, dignity, and recognition. She could complain, she could argue, but that would not solve the problem. She needed to think bigger, to approach this situation differently. The fire that had fueled her through years of business challenges now burned in a new way. She wouldn't let this pass. She wouldn't let this humiliation define her. The attendant returned with a polite smile, and she took a step back, deciding it was time to board. As she walked down the jetway, she felt a mix of emotions: anger, determination, and a deep sense of resolve. She imagined herself in the VIP section, then contrasted it with the reality she faced. The difference between those two images sparked a determination that she hadn't felt in years. Once seated in the regular first-class area, she refused to allow herself to be swallowed by disappointment. Instead, she observed the surroundings, the people, and the service with sharp awareness. She noted how smoothly the crew worked, the subtle hierarchy among passengers, and the invisible rules that governed behavior and treatment. She thought about how she had always operated in business: identify the rules, understand them, and then figure out how to use them or change them. The hum of the engines, the low murmur of conversation, and the scent of fresh coffee filled the cabin. She leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes for a moment, and allowed herself a deep breath. This incident, as small as it seemed, had sparked something significant inside her. She remembered that her wealth and success were not just numbers in a bank account. They were tools, resources, and opportunities. She had the ability to change the circumstances around her, to create an environment where such disrespect could not happen again. As the plane lifted into the sky, she reflected on the injustice she had just experienced, and how it mirrored broader challenges that countless people faced. She thought about the countless times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or overlooked, and how each of those moments had fueled her determination. This moment on the plane was no different. It was another challenge, another test of resilience. She began to plan quietly, considering every detail. She thought about how she could take control of the situation in a meaningful way. The seed of an idea began to grow. What if she could eliminate the possibility of this happening again, not just for herself, but for others who faced similar barriers? The thought was bold, audacious even, but it fit her personality. She had built an empire by taking risks, challenging norms, and refusing to accept limitations. Her attention returned to the present. She looked around at the other passengers, many of whom seemed unaware of the storm of thoughts in her mind. Some were reading, others were working on laptops, some chatting quietly. She realized that while she could not change the past, she could shape the future. The frustration, humiliation, and anger she felt were fuel, not a burden. As she leaned back, she allowed a small, knowing smile to form. This experience, unpleasant as it was, would not define her. Instead, it would inspire a new path, a creative solution, and perhaps a story of triumph that went far beyond a single flight. She resolved to use her resources, influence, and intelligence to ensure that no one could ever treat her with such disregard again. The flight continued, and she let her mind wander, mapping out possibilities, imagining scenarios where she could take control, and picturing a future where she could rewrite the rules. The determination inside her grew stronger with each passing mile, and by the time the plane began its descent, she had a clear vision of what she would do next. She would not react impulsively or with anger. She would act decisively, strategically, and with a sense of purpose that only someone who had earned everything from the ground up could command. When the plane touched down, she felt a calm resolve. She collected her belongings, adjusted her suit, and walked toward the exit with the same quiet confidence she had when she first entered the airport. The experience had been jarring, but it had also been clarifying. She now knew that she could transform this moment of indignity into a story of empowerment. She had faced unfairness before, and she had risen above it. This was no different, except the stakes were even higher, and the opportunity to make a bold move lay directly ahead. She stepped off the plane with her head held high, aware of the eyes that followed her, aware of the whispers but unaffected. The world could see her, but more importantly, she could see the path forward. She knew that what happened today was just the beginning of a story that would not only change her life, but also send a message that respect, dignity, and fairness could not be denied. She had turned a moment of humiliation into the first spark of an idea that would shape her next move, one that would be remembered for years to come. After the flight, she returned to her office, a modern space with glass walls, a view of the city, and the quiet hum of a place where decisions were made. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, letting the events of the day settle in her mind. The feeling of being barred from the VIP section replayed in her thoughts, but instead of frustration, she began to feel clarity. She realized that she could either dwell on the humiliation or turn it into something powerful. She chose the latter. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop not to check emails but to reflect. Her journey had been long, from starting small with a little money and bigger dreams to building an empire that many admired. She remembered the countless nights working alone, the setbacks that threatened to derail her, and the doubts from people who said she would never make it. Each memory reminded her that obstacles were never the end, but an invitation to grow stronger. Her mind wandered back to her early days in business, the tiny office that barely held her, and a small team. They worked tirelessly making connections, pitching ideas, and facing rejection after rejection. There were days when she felt invisible, as if her work, her talent, and her ideas were overlooked. But she refused to be invisible. She learned to take every challenge as a lesson, and to convert every no into a strategy for a future yes. Now, with billions in assets, successful ventures, and global recognition, she felt a sense of irony. The same world that once ignored her now paid attention to her every move, yet the same old barriers persisted in unexpected ways. Being barred from the VIP section was more than a slight. It was a reminder that society often underestimated people like her, regardless of their achievements. It was also a reminder that change had to be proactive, not reactive. She picked up a notebook and began writing down ideas. What could she do to ensure no one could ever treat her like this again? She thought about influence, power, and ownership. She considered making a statement, but it had to be meaningful, not just impulsive. She wanted to transform the moment of humiliation into a symbol of accomplishment and empowerment. Her thoughts turned to the business principles that had always guided her. In every venture, she had looked for opportunities others ignored, invested in ideas that seemed risky, and took bold steps when others hesitated. She realized that the same approach could be applied here. She had the resources, the knowledge, and the network to take control of the situation in a way that was strategic and impactful. She envisioned a scenario where she could change the rules entirely, not by complaining, not by confrontation, but by creating a new reality where she could operate on her terms. Her mind raced with possibilities. What if she owned the plane or the company that managed it? What if she could redesign the experience so that respect and professionalism were guaranteed, and anyone who had ever doubted her could see the result of her determination? The idea was audacious, but that was her style. She had never been content with small victories. She wanted to make an impact that was visible, undeniable, and inspiring. She imagined the plane as more than a vehicle. It could be a statement, a symbol of resilience, and a testament to her journey from humble beginnings to extraordinary success. As the night deepened, she mapped out the steps she would need to take. She considered the financial aspects, the negotiations, the logistics, and the people who could assist her. She also thought about the crew, the service, and the experience itself. It had to be flawless, a reflection of her standards and her values. She refused to compromise on quality or dignity. In the quiet hours, she reflected on the personal side of this decision. It was not only about pride or revenge. It was about creating a system that embodied respect and equality. She wanted to ensure that no one else would experience the subtle dismissal or embarrassment that she felt. Her vision extended beyond herself to a broader message: that success, hard work, and integrity deserved recognition, and barriers could be overcome with determination and creativity. She also considered the reactions of the public. If word got out, it could inspire others to take control of their circumstances, to assert their worth, and to challenge situations that seemed unfair. She wanted the story to be one of empowerment, not just personal triumph. It was a lesson in turning setbacks into opportunities, humiliation into motivation, and obstacles into milestones. Her thoughts shifted to the practical aspects of her plan. She would need advisors who understood aviation, logistics, and negotiation. She would research companies that operated private aircraft, learn the costs, and evaluate the best way to acquire the right plane. She considered customization options, crew training, and service standards. Every detail mattered, and she wanted this project to reflect her vision fully. Throughout the night, she felt a sense of excitement that she hadn't felt in years. This was not just a business opportunity, it was a personal mission. It was a chance to demonstrate that power and respect were not given, but earned, created, and maintained. She felt the same thrill she had felt when closing her first major deal. When seeing her company grow from a small office to a global enterprise, when turning ideas into tangible results that others had doubted. By the morning, her resolve had strengthened. She had transformed the memory of humiliation into a blueprint for action. She began reaching out to her network, discreetly gathering information and assembling a team of experts who could assist in turning her vision into reality. Her plan was clear: take control, create the environment she deserved, and ensure that respect and dignity were built into every detail. She also spent time thinking about the crew. The experience had taught her that systems and training mattered as much as ownership. She wanted a team that understood her expectations, treated everyone with fairness, and operated with professionalism. She reflected on leadership, realizing that her approach had always been to inspire excellence rather than enforce compliance. The same principle would guide this project. As the days passed, she balanced this new mission with her existing responsibilities. Meetings, calls, and decisions continued, but the idea of transforming a personal slight into a legacy project fueled her energy. She noticed that her focus sharpened, her creativity expanded, and her confidence grew. She understood that her success was not just about money or status. It was about the ability to act decisively, to turn challenges into opportunities, and to set examples that mattered. She also thought about the symbolism of her actions. Owning the plane was more than a purchase. It was a statement. It was a way to assert that talent, hard work, and vision could overcome prejudice and arbitrary barriers. It was a reminder that dignity and respect were not privileges to be granted, but rights to be claimed. Her reflection continued late into the night. She imagined the day when she would board the plane as the owner, when she would see the crew prepared to serve with excellence, and when she would witness the transformation of an environment that once excluded her into one that reflected her values. She smiled at the thought, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction at the prospect of turning adversity into empowerment. The experience had also given her insight into human behavior, expectations, and the subtle ways society enforces hierarchies. She realized that many people accepted limitations without question, but she had learned to challenge assumptions, to test boundaries, and to innovate solutions that others never considered. This was simply another opportunity to apply the same lessons in a different context, with potentially even greater impact. As she closed her notebook and prepared for the next day, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The incident on the plane was no longer a source of anger or frustration. It was a catalyst. It had sparked a vision that combined strategy, creativity, and empowerment. She understood that the journey ahead would require patience, precision, and resilience, but she was ready. She had faced challenges before, and she had always risen above them. This would be no different. She left her office that night with a renewed sense of energy. The city lights shimmered below, and the quiet hum of life around her seemed to echo the possibilities she envisioned. She walked with intention, knowing that the next steps would be decisive and transformative. She had turned reflection into resolve and resolve into a plan. What had started as a moment of exclusion had now become the foundation for an extraordinary next chapter. She was ready to act, to create, and to ensure that respect, dignity, and empowerment were never optional again. The next few weeks became a blur of meetings, phone calls, and quiet determination. She moved through her days with calm precision, her focus fixed on her goal. Every detail mattered, and she was determined to see it through with the same discipline that had carried her from a tiny startup to a global empire. This was not just another business move. It was personal, and it carried meaning far deeper than money could measure. She began by reaching out to a trusted financial advisor, someone who had been with her for years and understood the way she thought. They met in her office one morning as the sun streamed through the tall windows. The advisor looked puzzled when she explained what she wanted. "You want to buy a plane?" he asked, still trying to process the idea. "Yes," she said simply. "Not just any plane. The one I flew on last week." He hesitated for a moment, then smiled knowingly. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious," she replied. "I want full ownership. No partnership, no co-investors. I want control." He nodded slowly, already understanding her tone. "Then we'll make it happen." Within days, the process began. Her team started researching the airline's ownership structure, the aircraft's market value, and the legal steps required to make a direct acquisition. It wasn't a simple purchase. It was layered with negotiations, regulations, and complex contracts. But complexity had never scared her. She had built her life on navigating difficult systems and turning obstacles into stepping stones. When she learned the estimated price, she didn't flinch. Money was not the issue. What mattered was what the purchase represented. It was about reclaiming dignity, about transforming a moment of exclusion into a statement of empowerment. She knew that people would talk when the news got out. Some would call it impulsive, others might call it extravagant, but she didn't care. She wasn't doing it for applause. She was doing it to send a message, to herself and to anyone who had ever been made to feel less than they were. The first negotiation meeting was held in a private boardroom at a sleek downtown building. She sat across from a team of executives, calm and composed as they discussed terms. The men across the table underestimated her at first, as people often did. But the moment she began speaking, their expressions changed. Her knowledge, her clarity, and her confidence left no room for doubt. She asked precise questions about the maintenance, crew contracts, and flight routes. She pointed out details that even the executives had overlooked. By the end of the meeting, they realized they weren't dealing with just a wealthy buyer. They were dealing with someone who understood power. After several rounds of discussions, the agreement was finalized. The plane would be hers within a month. When the final papers were signed, she leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a rare smile. The same plane that had once denied her entry into the VIP section would soon carry her name on its ownership documents. It was poetic justice wrapped in quiet elegance, but she wasn't done. Buying the plane was only part of the plan. She wanted to redefine what luxury and respect meant. She began designing the interior, working with architects and designers to create an atmosphere that reflected sophistication and inclusivity. Every element, from the seats to the lighting, from the uniforms to the service menu, would carry her touch. She envisioned an environment where every guest felt valued, not judged. During one of the design meetings, she walked through the empty hangar where the plane was being prepared for renovation. The air smelled faintly of fuel and metal. She ran her hand along the smooth exterior of the aircraft, feeling the cool surface beneath her fingertips. A wave of satisfaction passed through her. It wasn't just a plane anymore. It was a symbol. It stood for every battle she had fought and every barrier she had broken. She instructed her team to ensure that the crew who had treated her poorly were released from duty. It wasn't revenge, it was about accountability. She believed in second chances, but she also believed in consequences. Respect was a non-negotiable value, and anyone representing her name had to live by it. In their place, she hired a new team, professionals from diverse backgrounds who understood hospitality and human decency. She held interviews personally, wanting to see their attitudes as much as their skills. Each candidate was asked the same question: "What does respect mean to you?" Their answers varied, but she was looking for sincerity, empathy, and awareness. When she finally selected the team, she told them, "You're not just crew members. You are ambassadors of how people should treat one another, with dignity, kindness, and grace." They nodded, understanding the weight of her words. As renovations progressed, the media began to catch wind of her purchase. Stories circulated online and in magazines. Some praised her move as bold and inspiring. Others speculated about her motives. But she paid no attention to the noise. Her focus was on execution. She wanted every element to be perfect. The seating, the decor, the service culture, even the smallest detail of the boarding experience. Her leadership style had always been the same: set the standard, and then raise it. When the day finally came for the plane to be unveiled, she stood on the tarmac, watching as the sunlight reflected off its polished surface. The company logo she had designed gleamed near the cockpit. It represented more than just ownership. It symbolized pride, perseverance, and progress. She took a deep breath, remembering the day she had stood outside that same plane, denied entry into the VIP section. The contrast between then and now made her smile softly. Before taking her first flight on her own aircraft, she gathered her new crew in the cabin. The air smelled fresh, the leather seats gleamed, and the soft lighting created a warm glow. She looked around the room and said, "This plane represents something more than travel. It represents change. I want everyone who steps inside to feel welcome and respected, no matter who they are. That's what luxury truly means." The crew applauded quietly, feeling proud to be part of something meaningful. As she took her seat, the same kind of seat she had once been barred from, she felt a wave of calm wash over her. The engines roared to life and the plane began to move down the runway. She gazed out the window, thinking about how far she had come, not just in wealth, but in wisdom. As the plane lifted off the ground, she reflected on her decision. It wasn't about ego, it was about transformation. She had taken an experience that could have left her bitter and turned it into one that empowered her. It was a reminder to herself and to others that adversity could be reshaped into strength. The sky outside glowed golden with the setting sun, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude. During the flight, she walked through the cabin, speaking to her crew, observing their work, and making mental notes. She wanted everything to flow naturally, to feel genuine. The smiles, the service, the conversations, it all needed to be human, not scripted. She believed true luxury wasn't about money. It was about feeling seen, valued, and respected. Hours later, when the plane landed, her team congratulated her. Reporters waiting nearby snapped photos as she stepped out, but she didn't pause for interviews. She wasn't looking for publicity. She wanted her actions to speak louder than any headline could. The plane was more than a purchase. It was a message that she had rewritten the rules. Over the next few weeks, she began using the plane for both personal and business travel. Each time she boarded, she was reminded of how that single act of exclusion had sparked an entire transformation. What once made her feel powerless now filled her with strength. She had turned pain into purpose, and that purpose guided her to something greater than revenge. It was restoration. One evening, after a long trip, she sat alone inside the plane before disembarking. The cabin was quiet, and the city lights twinkled in the distance. She thought about the journey that had led her here. Every struggle, every setback, every doubt had prepared her for this. She had proven to herself that no matter how others treated her, she had the power to shape her destiny. As she looked around at the elegant space she had created, she realized that the true victory wasn't owning the plane. It was reclaiming her peace of mind. It was knowing that she could respond to unfairness not with anger, but with creation. She had built something beautiful out of something painful. That to her was success in its truest form. The hum of the engines faded as the plane powered down. She gathered her things, gave one last look around, and smiled. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. She had proven to herself and the world that grace and determination were stronger than any insult or barrier. As she stepped off the plane, the night air cool against her skin, she knew she had changed the narrative, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. What began as humiliation had become triumph. And it wasn't about power or revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity with elegance, turning pain into progress, and showing that the best response to being told you can't sit somewhere is to own the place entirely. The day of her first official flight as the owner arrived quietly, without any grand announcement or ceremony. She didn't need fanfare. The satisfaction she felt came from within. The early morning air was cool as she arrived at the private terminal. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, the kind of sunrise that reminded her of new beginnings. The sleek jet stood waiting, shining under the light, its surface flawless. Her initials were elegantly engraved near the cabin door, a subtle mark of ownership that meant more to her than any public recognition ever could. The crew stood by the stairs, neatly dressed, professional, and ready. They greeted her with warm smiles that carried genuine respect. She returned the smiles not as an owner addressing employees, but as someone acknowledging partners in a shared vision. As she stepped onto the plane, a familiar feeling came over her. But this time it wasn't frustration or humiliation. It was pride. The same steps she had once climbed as a passenger denied a seat now led her to a space she had created from her own power. Inside, everything looked perfect. The soft lighting glowed against cream-colored walls. The leather seats were smooth and inviting, arranged with care. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the faint aroma of coffee brewing in the galley. She ran her hand along the back of one seat and felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. Every detail was as she had envisioned, simple, elegant, and warm. It wasn't about luxury for its way. It was about comfort, dignity, and the feeling of being valued. She took her seat near the window, the same position where she had once been told she didn't belong. Now she looked out at the runway and smiled faintly. Life had come full circle, but in a way that few could have imagined. Her assistant, sitting a few seats away, looked at her and said softly, "It's beautiful." "It's more than that," she replied. "It's freedom." As the engines began to hum, she felt a familiar vibration under her feet, the sound that always reminded her of movement, of progress. The plane started to roll and she closed her eyes for a moment. Images from that day, the attendant's expression, the stares from other passengers, the quiet sting of being dismissed, flashed in her mind. But instead of pain, she felt gratitude. Without that moment, she might never have taken this step. Sometimes life's unfair moments became the sparks for the greatest transformations. When the plane lifted off, she watched the ground fall away beneath her. The city below looked small, distant, almost unreal. The clouds stretched endlessly, glowing in the morning light. She had always loved flying. It gave her perspective. No matter how complex things seemed on the ground, everything felt simpler from above. The world looked vast and full of possibilities. Once the plane leveled, she unbuckled her seatbelt and walked through the cabin. The crew was moving gracefully, offering refreshments and ensuring everything ran smoothly. She stopped to chat with them, asking about their families, their training, their experiences. She wanted them to feel valued, not just as employees, but as people. One of them told her, "Working here feels different. You make it feel like we matter." She smiled. "Because you do," she said softly. As she returned to her seat, she reflected on that moment. Her success had always been rooted in relationships, building trust, respect, and connection. She had learned long ago that leadership wasn't about control. It was about creating an environment where everyone could thrive. That was what she wanted this plane to represent. Not exclusivity, but excellence built on mutual respect. Later in the flight, she opened her tablet to review a few documents. She was expanding one of her companies into new markets, a project that required her full attention. Yet as she worked, she found herself smiling again. The sound of the engines, the comfort of the cabin, and the awareness that she had turned an insult into innovation filled her with calm focus. She realized that success wasn't measured by wealth or possessions. It was measured by what one did with them. As hours passed, she began to think about the journey that had brought her here. The long nights, the endless challenges, the moments of doubt, all of it had built her into someone unshakable. But beyond her accomplishments, it was her mindset that defined her. She had learned to see opportunity in obstacles and strength in setbacks. Even when the world told her she didn't belong, she created her own space. When the plane began to descend toward their destination, she looked out the window again. The clouds parted, revealing a glittering coastline. She could see boats drifting in the water, tiny against the horizon. The view reminded her of something her grandmother once said: "Don't wait for a seat at someone else's table. Build your own." She had done exactly that, literally and figuratively. As the plane touched down, the landing smooth and steady, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The plane taxied to the private hangar, where her staff and a few close partners waited to greet her. When the door opened, sunlight streamed in bright and warm. She stepped out, pausing for a moment at the top of the stairs, looking over the jet she now owned. For a moment, she thought about how different this moment could have been if she had chosen anger instead of action. She was proud of the choice she had made. That evening, she hosted a small dinner for her closest team members. It wasn't a celebration of wealth or ownership. It was a quiet gathering of gratitude. They talked about business, life, and lessons learned. At one point, one of them asked her, "Did you ever imagine it would come to this, owning your own plane?" She laughed softly. "No," she said. "I imagined a life of purpose, not possessions. But sometimes purpose brings you things you never thought you needed." They raised glasses, not in pride, but in respect, for the journey, for resilience, and for the power of turning something painful into something empowering. Later that night, when everyone had left and the house was quiet, she sat by the window overlooking the city lights. She thought again about that day when she had been refused a seat. At the time, it had felt like a small but sharp wound. Now she saw it as a turning point. Life had tested her many times, but this time, she had responded with creation instead of confrontation. That made all the difference. She thought about the countless people who faced the same kind of silent bias or unfairness every day. She wanted them to know that dignity wasn't something anyone could take away. It was something that lived within, something that no one could touch unless you allowed them to. That was the real message behind her story. Not the purchase, not the power, but the choice to rise with grace. The following week, she scheduled a flight to take a group of young entrepreneurs, mostly women, from underserved communities on a tour across cities where she had business hubs. She wanted them to experience what success looked like, to show them that the impossible could become possible with persistence and belief. When the young group boarded the plane, their eyes widened in awe. She smiled and told them, "I want you to see this not as luxury but as possibility. Whatever walls you face, you can build something beyond them." During the flight, she shared her story, not as a boast, but as a lesson. She spoke of her struggles, her moments of fear, and the times she nearly gave up. The young entrepreneurs listened closely, inspired not by her wealth but by her resilience. When they landed, one young woman approached her and said, "I'll never forget this. You've made me believe I can make it too." That moment touched her more deeply than any award or recognition ever had. She realized that her true legacy wouldn't be in the companies she built or the wealth she accumulated, but in the lives she inspired. The plane, the symbol of her victory, was now also a vessel for hope and motivation. What began as a response to humiliation had become a platform for empowerment. That night, as she flew back home, she sat by the window again, looking out at the stars. The sky stretched endlessly, peaceful and quiet. She thought about how far she had come, how much she had grown, and how her story might encourage others to keep pushing, to keep believing. She didn't need validation or applause. The quiet satisfaction in her heart was enough. When the plane landed back at her home airport, she stayed seated for a moment after everyone else had disembarked. She looked around the cabin, now empty but full of meaning. She reached out and touched the seat beside her, the same kind of seat that had once been denied to her. She whispered softly, "Look at me now." But there was no bitterness in her tone, only peace. She had turned an insult into inspiration, a rejection into redemption. She smiled as she stood up and made her way toward the exit. As the door opened and the cool air touched her face, she felt lighter than ever. She had found her closure, not through revenge but through transformation. Her journey had proven that true power came not from owning things but from owning your story. Months passed and life had become busier than ever for her. The plane that had once been a symbol of personal triumph now served a greater purpose. It carried her across continents for meetings, charity work, and mentorship programs. Wherever she went, she met people who had heard her story, how she had turned humiliation into empowerment. But she didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as a reminder of what was possible when one refused to let bitterness win. One early morning, she stood by the window of her office overlooking the city skyline. The rising sun cast golden light over the buildings, a sight that always filled her with calm. The hum of activity from the streets below reminded her of her own beginnings. Days when she had struggled to pay rent, when every meeting felt like a fight for recognition, and when her dreams seemed out of reach. The distance between that past and her present life felt both long and short at the same time. Her assistant entered quietly, holding a tablet. "The invitations for your foundation's gala are ready," she said. The gala was one of her favorite events of the year. It wasn't about luxury or attention. It was about raising funds for education and entrepreneurship programs for underprivileged women. Every year she made sure to attend personally, meeting as many people as she could, listening to their stories, and offering advice when needed. After reviewing the plans, she smiled and said, "Let's make this one special. I want people to feel seen and heard, not just inspired." Her assistant nodded, knowing that this was her guiding principle in everything she did. Later that day, she boarded her plane once again, heading to a small town where a new women's business center was being launched. The flight was smooth, and as she sat by the window, she found herself thinking back to that first day when she had been turned away from the VIP section. It almost felt like a story from another life, but it remained part of her, one that shaped her values and her strength. When she arrived, the townspeople greeted her warmly. The new center was modest but full of potential. As she walked through the building, she saw young women working on laptops, attending training sessions, and discussing ideas. Their faces were full of hope and determination. It reminded her of her younger self, hungry for opportunity but uncertain of where to find it. During the opening ceremony, she was invited to speak. Standing before the crowd, she took a deep breath and began, "There was a time when I was told I didn't belong in a certain place. I could have walked away angry or humiliated. Instead, I decided to create my own place, a space where no one could tell me I didn't belong. And today I see that same spirit in all of you." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her journey. The crowd listened silently, hanging on to every word. She continued, "Never forget that rejection is not the end. Sometimes it's just the world testing how badly you want something. Don't fight for a seat at someone else's table. Build your own and make room for others." Applause filled the hall. Some women had tears in their eyes. For them, her presence was more than symbolic. It was proof that success didn't have to come from privilege. It could be built from persistence, dignity, and self-belief. After the ceremony, she stayed to talk with the attendees. One young woman approached her shyly and said, "I was told I don't have what it takes to run a business because I'm too quiet. But hearing your story makes me think maybe I just need to find my own way." She smiled warmly and replied, "Quiet doesn't mean weak. It just means you're listening. Use that. Lead in your own voice." Moments like these reminded her why she did what she did. Her wealth and achievements were meaningful, but they were tools. Tools she could use to open doors for others. She had turned pain into purpose, and that purpose kept growing with each life she touched. When she returned to her jet later that evening, she was greeted by her crew, who had become like family to her. They always made sure she was comfortable, but she never treated them as mere staff. She often joined them for meals and listened to their stories. Before takeoff, she looked around and said, "You know, every time I step on this plane, I remember where it started. I don't take it for granted." The flight home was quiet. She sat by the window watching the stars appear one by one in the dark sky. The hum of the engines was steady, almost soothing. As she sipped her tea, she thought about her next goals. She wanted to start a global initiative to mentor young women in aviation and technology, fields where representation was still limited. The idea made her smile. Life had taught her that the best revenge was not in proving others wrong, but in creating lasting change. When the plane landed, she returned home to her quiet house. It was late, but she couldn't sleep right away. She walked through her living room where photos lined the walls, pictures from different stages of her life. Her small apartment in her early 20s, her first office, the groundbreaking of her company headquarters, and finally one of her standing beside the jet, smiling with pride. Each image told a story of resilience. She sat on the couch and closed her eyes, replaying her journey in her mind. There had been pain, yes, but there had also been joy, laughter, and moments of deep connection. She had faced doubt from others, but the greatest battle had been within herself. The struggle to keep believing even when everything seemed impossible. That was the victory she was most proud of. The next morning, she woke up early and went for a walk. The air was crisp, the streets quiet. She liked these peaceful moments where no one recognized her, and she could just be herself. As she walked past a small cafe, she noticed a young woman sitting alone with a laptop, looking stressed. She hesitated for a moment, then walked in and ordered coffee. On her way out, she stopped by the young woman's table and said gently, "Don't give up. Whatever it is you're working on, keep going. You might be closer than you think." The young woman looked up, surprised, but smiled. "Thank you," she said softly. It was a small moment, but for her it mattered. She believed kindness had a ripple effect, that even the smallest gestures could change the course of someone's life. Weeks later, the night of the gala arrived. The venue was beautifully decorated with soft lights, elegant flowers, and displays showing the projects funded by her foundation. Guests arrived from around the world, but she stayed humble, spending her time moving through the crowd, greeting people, listening to their ideas, and offering advice. She didn't stand on stage for long. Instead, she preferred to hear from those whose lives had been changed by her work. At one point, a video played, a compilation of stories from women she had helped. Each one spoke about how her foundation had supported their dreams. Watching it, she felt her eyes sting with emotion. This was her real success. The applause that followed wasn't for her wealth. It was for her impact. After the gala, she stepped outside for some air. The night was clear, the stars bright above the city. Her driver waited nearby, but she stood still for a moment, looking up. She thought about how different life could have been if she had allowed that one painful experience to define her. Instead, she had written her own ending. As she looked at the sky, she whispered softly, "Thank you for every no that led me here." The driver opened the car door, but before getting in, she glanced at her phone. There was a message from her assistant. A journalist wants to write a feature on how you turned that moment on the plane into your life's mission. She smiled and typed back, "Tell them it wasn't about the plane. It was about reclaiming my place in the world." The car pulled away slowly, the city lights reflecting on the windows. Inside, she felt peaceful. Her story wasn't about revenge and it wasn't about power, it was about choice. The choice to stay kind when the world wasn't, to stay strong when things felt impossible, and to rise not in anger but in purpose. In the months that followed, her work expanded globally. Her name became synonymous with empowerment and grace. People admired her success, but what they remembered most was her humanity. She continued to mentor, build, and uplift others, knowing that the greatest legacy anyone could leave was not wealth, but wisdom. One afternoon, years later, she was flying again, this time not for business, but for peace. The sun dipped below the clouds, casting a soft golden glow across the horizon. She sat quietly, hands folded, a gentle smile on her face. Life had taken her full circle, from rejection to redemption, from silence to influence. As the jet cruised above the clouds, she whispered to herself, "I bought a plane, but what I really owned was my story." And that story, she knew, would live far beyond her lifetime, in every person who refused to give up, in every dreamer who decided to build instead of break, and in every soul who learned that dignity is the highest form of success.